Welcome to the Elaborate Topics podcast, where we focus on lab-specific strategies for medical laboratory professionals. We're proud to be the healthcare detectives that work behind the scenes to get the results needed to influence medical decisions. Let's grow together and jump right into the lab.
Welcome back to another episode of Elaborate Topics. We are your hosts, Lona Small, Tywauna Wilson, and Stephanie Whitehead. We're so excited about this opportunity to talk to you about all things medical lab. For those of you tuning in for the first time, Elaborate Topics is a weekly podcast where myself and my co-hosts will bring to you topics relating to lab and leadership and help you to excel inside and outside of the lab. I'm so excited about today's show. We're going to talk about regulatory inspection, a very important topic that we take real seriously in the lab. Stephanie, could you just tell us a little bit, describe what the inspection process and who performs the inspection?
Yes, I can. Hi. So, like Lona said, in this episode, we'll be sharing with you some insight on how to be successful in any of the regulatory inspections that you have while you're in the laboratory. So whether you're being inspected or you are conducting an inspection of a laboratory, this podcast should help give you those helpful tips that you need, to assist you with those aspects. So I'll start the podcast out for our listeners by describing the laboratory inspection process in general. So in the clinical laboratory, the delivery of quality laboratory results is at the heart of what we do. 70% of the information that we give out is used for the physicians and the clinicians to help diagnose, treat, monitor their patients. So it's really important that we understand the accuracy of the test that we're giving out. So to produce laboratory testing that is accurate, even to do lab testing, each laboratory needs an active CLIA number, and that is a mandate set by the government and CMS. CMS's policy for CLIA-certified laboratory includes that each CLIA-certified laboratory will have an initial inspection that is announced, and then biannual recertifications of inspection that will be likely unannounced. In addition, if you're working in a laboratory where somebody has lodged a complaint or has a concern about your operations or your testing, you are always subject to a follow-up inspection or a complaint inspection, and that can be unannounced. The inspection process itself is designed to thoroughly examine every discipline within your laboratory, and in essence, to measure your laboratory's compliance with the expectations set forth by state, local, and federal regulations. In addition, inspections are also meant to assist the laboratory in improving patient care. A lot of times inspections help us to emphasize on the aspects of our test performance that need improvement or can be done better as set forth by better practices. So it's really important that you view any regulatory inspection that may come to your department as an educational experience. So the inspectors are not the police that come to give you a ticket, or sometimes we may say, we got dinged for that. It's really important that if you're a leader of a laboratory or you're in a laboratory, that you coach the team and you talk to the team about viewing the inspection process as a way for us to understand how we can improve what we're doing every day for our patients. In terms of who is going to perform your inspection, previously I mentioned the CMS. So your inspection could come from CMS themselves or a representative representing CMS, and that could even be CLIA. They will likely come anytime during your normal business operations, or if you're, a clinic, laboratory, and you're open 8 to 5, their inspection will fall between those times. There are currently 7 different CMS-approved accreditation organizations, with the CAP being the most recognized, the College of American Pathologists. But there are others, the AABB, or the American Association of Blood Bank, ASHI, the American Society of Histocompatibility and Immunogenetics, as well as the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations. So should your laboratory fail to be in compliance following an inspection by one of these approved organizations, you're open to a full review by the CMS. So as a laboratory professional, it's definitely important that you understand how to work with your team and how to work with the pathologists that work within your laboratory to be as prepared as possible on the day of inspection. And Tywauna is going to give you some very helpful tips on how to do that.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was an awesome introduction about the inspections from the laboratory perspective. I'm going to talk a little bit about the pre-survey information, getting ready. So now that you know that your regulatory inspection is occurring, we need to get ready for that survey so we can make sure that it goes as smoothly as possible. So in order to make sure that the survey goes pretty smoothly, you want to make sure that you provide any pre-survey information to the accrediting organization. A lot of times they want to know who's running your facility, who is your medical director, who's the CLIA director, whose license is on your particular CAP number. They also want to know about your technical staff. Who do you have on your roster of staff? What credentials do they have? What license do they have? What certification do they have? What education do they have? Other pre-survey information includes your testing volume. How many tests per year is your organization reporting out? What types of testing does your organization do? Do you do hematology, chemistry, blood banking, microbiology? Are you doing genetics? Are you doing some of the other complex testing? They want to know that information as well. So you want to determine the laboratory requirements that apply to your particular lab based off of your test menu, based off of what testing you said you were going to perform. There are 4 key things that you need to be aware of when you are preparing. One thing is, what is the level of testing complexity for your organization? Do you have wave, moderate, or high complexity testing? This is important because of the type of testing it is will determine the requirements that your staff need to have in order to perform that type of testing. Your wave testing, for example, would be testing that is able to be performed by a high school graduate who's been trained and competent to perform that testing. Your moderate complex laboratory testing could be that in your hematology and chemistry area. These are typically your degreed individuals who have an MLT or MT certification that are trained and competent and meets the criteria for testing personnel. Your high complexity testing could be that of those that's working in the blood bank, would have high complexity testing, or if you have any FDA modified or lab developed tests, that would be lab high complexity testing. Your proficiency testing program is another consideration when preparing. You want to make sure that you are subscribed to a proficiency testing program that could be from the CAP, the College of American Pathologists testing program. It also could be from other organizations that have proficiency that you can subscribe from. API is another organization that has proficiency testing materials. So when you look at your testing menu, there are certain analytes that have to be subscribed to recognized proficiency testing program, and then there's other analytes in which you can use alternative assessment, for example, to meet that criteria that does not have to subscribe to an official program, but you do have to conduct some type of proficiency on that particular analyte. Everything that you do in your laboratory should be regulated, and it should be where you are testing and following the rules set forth from your accrediting agency. Review established written policies, processes, and procedure manuals. You want to make sure that you are in compliance with your procedures. I know sometimes as laboratorians working in the lab, especially if you've been at a particular facility for a long period of time, we've done this procedure for years, and sometimes the procedure change and what you are doing is out of scope with what the procedure actually says. So we need to make sure that we are always in alignment by what our procedures say. Our procedures are kind of governed by our accrediting agency, and of course, your laboratory has to be in compliance with the regulatory agency. You can choose to have a more strict approach than what is required, but you cannot have a more lenient approach. So making sure that your written policy, processes, and procedures are actually what you are doing and are meeting the guidelines as set forth from the accrediting agency. These documents must outline the procedure for the 3 phases of testing for each test performed by the laboratory. You also want to review your QA plan and ensure laboratory safety procedures align with OSHA requirements and your state federal standards. So you want to make sure you're in line with OSHA. I'm in the state of Ohio, so I have to make sure that ours align with the Ohio Department of Health as well, and your facilities have to be in alignment with those things in your particular states. You want to review competency assessment documents. Every staff member who is reporting out results need to be trained and competent. So they need to undergo competency assessment. New staff members should have a 6-month competency and then an annual one and annually thereafter. And if you have been in that laboratory already, annually thereafter for competency assessment. So we want to make sure that our team that's reporting our results are trained and competent in the work that they are doing. Review quality control, quality monitors and validations. We want to make sure our quality assurance plan is in order. We want to make sure that our instruments are in control before we are releasing any patient results for the day. So we want to make sure proper documentation of maintenance has occurred, as well as our quality control, running any calibrations or anything of that nature before you get started releasing patients for the day. Also being aware that when you have issues that occur with your instrumentation, that proper documentation is key. One of the key things is if it's not documented, then it has not happened. We have to be able to tell the story. And we want to review any non-conformance or corrective action plans. So we want to make sure that everything that we are doing in our laboratory, we have a plan of attack for. We have a documented plan, if this, then this, in our laboratories to make sure that we are staying in compliance and we are ready for laboratory success when our accrediting agencies come to inspect us. As good laboratorians, we all want to make sure that we are doing the best thing for our patients at all times. Right test, right patient, right result every single time. I know Lona has some awesome lab pro tips that she wants to share with us, and so I'll kick it back off to her.
Thanks so much, Tywauna. Tywauna talk about how we can actually prepare for the inspection, but, as Stephanie said, there could be an unannounced inspection, and that could be somebody could just complain about something. All your staff have the right to call into your regulatory agent if they see something that they're uncomfortable about, something that could be a patient safety issue, they can report it. And so it's so important to be always ready for any inspection. You could probably have an inspection that you had a lot of recurring safety issues, and they decide that they, even though you put things in place, they may want to come in earlier to see how things are going. If this is something that you're actually practicing on a regular basis outside of your inspection time. So it's so important to be always ready. And a lot of the things that Tywauna mentioned earlier in terms of prepping for an inspection when you know inspection is coming, that's something that you should be doing on a regular basis to make this part of your culture, that inspection-ready culture. And in order to make this happen, it's going to be important to involve as many people as possible, not only the person that's in the QA office or the director or manager, but to make sure that all staff, they're involved in the inspection readiness. What that does, it makes people aware of what's important. It makes them aware of the why and why are we doing this. So some of the things that we could do to prepare is make sure that everybody knows where different files are being kept. Because if there's an unannounced inspection and the main either supervisor or manager is not around, it's important for other people to know where different files are kept. So make sure there are common places for files, whether it's electronic files or physical files, but make sure people know where files are kept. Another thing that's important to be prepared is to actually do your own self-inspection. Well, self-inspection is a requirement by the regulatory bodies that you do a self-inspection in between the time, like Stephanie said, inspection is usually done every 2 years. So in between that 2-year period, you do your own self-inspection. So you're basically inspecting the lab the way an inspector would normally do that. But not only you're doing your self-inspection every other year in between the regular inspection, but it's also important to do regular audits. So for our organization, we do tracers. So it's a teaching institution, and we have fellows and residents coming through. So we use that as part of their requirement to do at least 2 or 3 audits. So we could select an assay, and they'll do a tracer from the time that actual test was ordered to the time it's reported. So they get to look at the whole process to make sure that the test was ordered properly, if there was any problem with collection, who collected it, was there training and competency for that person who did the collection, was the quality of the specimen correct, was it received properly in the lab, and the people who received it in the lab, was it tracked, was there training and competency, and throughout the whole process, to make sure that everybody that touched that specimen was trained, there was competency done on that person, and for that test there was proper validation, proper paperwork, all the instrument that it went through, there was proper instrument maintenance. So that's something that you're doing on a regular basis to make sure there's no gap in your system, so you're always ready. There are other things that can be done to involve staff to know how to answer questions. We do something that makes it more fun for staff, that we do like a scavenger hunt. Of course, every staff should know where their safety plan is. They should know where their SDS is, should be easily accessible. There are things that staff should know that an inspector could access that. So what we do, we make it fun. Give them a certain procedure. Where would you find this? Of course, we have an electronic file for procedure. Would you be able to find in which standard operation procedure would you be able to find this? If you were spilled with sodium hydroxide, what would you do? So they have to go through and actually do these things, pull the screenshot to make sure they know where to find things and how they would answer in an inspection. So, it's so important. Then, there's different audits that could be done on competency files. So you go through to make sure that the competencies are done, they're signed off properly, the documentation is clear, and in case an inspector could ask for anyone's competencies there. Things like validation records and instrument installation. We're making sure we're doing like regular audits and regular walkthrough. One thing that could be part of what you do on a regular basis is just looking at reagent expiration and labeling, making sure their secondary labels are done properly. You could do that on a weekly basis where you do weekly audits or spot checks. We do like 3 or 4 spot checks per week and check refrigerator and make sure people, when there's feedback, people tend to be more responsive. So if this is done on a regular basis, this involves everyone, and then there's more responsive and more awareness of making sure that the lab coats are always on properly, because that's part of the audit. People are using splash guards and different safety things. So it's so important to be inspection ready, so that whenever there's an inspection, there's not a lot of running around trying to get documents. And there are different softwares out there that you probably could check out. Media Lab is one of them, and there are others that will actually give you alerts to make sure that you're doing all the different things that you should be doing to be ready for an inspection. So Stephanie, maybe you could talk a little bit about becoming an inspector, because for self-inspection that we do, we encourage our staff to do training to be an inspector. So they basically have an idea what an inspector would be looking for, some of the questions they would ask. So they get the training, and we inspect our own labs. And so Stephanie could give some tips on how to be an inspector.
Thank you, Lona. And you're right. It's so important. All of the information that we've given you, we know that it's a lot. And so, maybe take some time, listen to this podcast a couple of different times, take some notes. But it's very important that you work together as a team. You pull together a group of people, all of your senior techs or technical supervisors, all of your quality team and your pathologist together, so you guys can work together to develop a plan to ensure that you're successful on the day of inspection. One of the ways that you can ensure that you are personally aware of all of the standards and you understand everything that is going to be required of your laboratory on the day of an inspection is to actually be an inspector yourself. So let's transition the podcast from the perspective of a laboratory being inspected to, like Lona said, the perspective of you perhaps being an inspector yourself. Like we talked about before when we said the accrediting agencies that come in every 2 years and inspect your laboratory, these accrediting agencies also rely on their partnerships with those laboratories that are accredited to work together to perform peer-based inspections. So if your laboratory is CAP or AABB or ASHI inspected, those organizations rely on all of the laboratories that participate in their program to also conduct inspections. And that just gives really great peer-to-peer interaction, overview, and insight into how the different laboratory processes work. So each laboratory professional can take the opportunity to work with an accrediting organization to become an assessor. In our laboratory, we've got several different blood bank experts that are AABB assessors. Our laboratory also does HLA testing, so our whole HLA staff are ASHI inspectors, and of course we've got a plethora of people who partner with us as we go out on CAP inspections. And so it's just a really awesome way for you to understand best practices that may be happening in other laboratories. Many of these organizations are international, so you can travel outside of your country and see laboratory operations, maybe in Korea, in other places, in other parts of the world. So it's a really good experience for you to expand your scope. And then there's nothing like traveling with your team, right? Because when you travel with your team, you get a whole different experience and a whole different team building and bonding experience like no other. So as you're thinking about becoming an assessor, you should think about, what is my area of strength? You know, what is my area in the laboratory that I really feel knowledgeable about? Because that's probably the area that you want to lean towards when you are thinking about how I want to inspect and what areas I want to be an assessor on. You'll need to draw from your own work experiences and your own strengths in the laboratory to help guide you as you're studying the checklist and reviewing the checklist. And so if you're a blood bank expert, you know, it is probably not best that you go out on an inspection and do the point of care section. You know, it's probably best that you inspect either the transfusion services, or if that organization has, their own donor services, supply and manufacturing, that you inspect those areas that you feel like you have the most expertise in. Also, if you're a little bit shy, or you're, like Lona said, you're just not sure about doing an inspection, participating in your laboratory's own self-inspection or any mock inspections or self-audits that you're performing within your own laboratory is a really good way to get practice on how to go through the checklist and then how to identify those things within the laboratory before you go out on a real inspection. Going out on inspection is a huge responsibility and requires a lot of time management and organization, because many times as an assessor, you've got 1 to 2 days to complete your inspection. And if you're going out in a large laboratory or a laboratory that has several outlying ambulatory clinic labs, then you'll really need to organize your time to make sure that you can get through the entirety of the checklist that you're actually inspecting. Many assessors use the acronym ROAD, R-O-A-D, to organize themselves in an inspection. And so that acronym stands for, the R stands for read. So the inspector will review a sampling of laboratory documents. So when they come in, they may say, hey, give me, 10 employee competency files, give me your procedures, give me any forms that you're currently using. So they'll spend some time reading. The O stands for observe. So as an assessor, after you've gone over some procedures, you may take some time to examine the laboratory activity and compare it to what you read in the documented procedures and policies. And then you're going to be looking for any observations that you see as a deviation between what you read and what you're actually observing. You're going to ask. So as an assessor, you're going to try to understand the questions that you want to ask to the staff. Most of the questions will be open-ended and probing questions that help you kind of collaborate whatever you saw in the R and the O, the read and the observe. And so your questions, kind of like Tywauna was mentioning in her talk about how your procedures need to match what you're actually doing on the bench. If you read a procedure that says that the scope of testing for a certain analyte is X, Y, and Z, but then you observe the technology is doing something totally different, you may ask questions to help kind of corroborate what you previously read and what you previously observed. And then finally, the D stands for discover and drill down. So the most common process to do this would be a tracer. So you would pick a process in the laboratory, like maybe the transfusion of blood, and you would follow that process from beginning to end, trying to understand the pre-analytical, the analytical, and the post-analytical processes in that entire tracer or in that entire process. So I may look at from the time the person gets their typing screen, so it is a process to understanding if they need an ABO recheck, to understanding how you issue that blood, how does the nurse do a positive patient identification or two nurse identification before they transfuse that blood. And I'm going to trace that process from beginning to end and look for any areas of improvement that I can make suggestions for in that way. But to do all of that, we don't want you to be intimidated. Like I said, it is a large responsibility, but to become an assessor, there is thorough training through each regulatory agency that you would want to be an assessor for. And you can be an assessor for many different accrediting organizations. I know colleagues that are assessors for up to 2, maybe 3 different organizations. It does take a bit of time, and so you need to work with your department on that, but it is a huge service to yourself and your career, and it helps open up your eyes and your scope to what's going on outside of your current surroundings. So, Lona, do you want to give some details of the training process and what should they expect in terms of length in training and how to get the training?
Sure. Yes, as Stephanie said, having training as an inspector really would be a great investment in yourself, and actually a lot of knowledge that you gain, not only to help with other labs, but also to help prepare your own lab. And so the good thing with the training is that training actually walks you through. You walk you through step by step from the beginning in terms of what do you need to know and what questions do you need to ask. How do you ask these questions? How do you prepare before you even get to that site? What are the things that you need to have? So it's like very detailed. It's a lot of time investment. I know for the CAP training that could be about sometimes 4 hours, but it actually introduces you to everything. Example of different checklists. You get a chance to understand, like Stephanie just mentioned, the road, different methods in which you can inspect. So there's different tools that you can use. Road is one tool. The tracer, you have different tracers. You have ways in which you can ask questions where you can actually get so many answers, so you'll be covering a lot of different checklists at the same time. But they'll recommend for new people that's just starting with inspection to just start maybe with the road because it's simpler. But with time, you can start using advanced tools. The good thing is that they guide you through. There's a lot of case studies, so you get a chance to practice, like how would you actually cite? What is really a deficiency and what's a recommendation? What's the actual difference between that? Because a lot of people sometimes get confused, and they would like, I won't give them a deficiency, I'll just give them a recommendation and think it's a lighter form of a deficiency, when in fact it's totally different. Because like with a deficiency, it's actually saying you're not compliant, you're not going according to the requirements. Is either your policy and your procedure and practice is not matching, or sometimes there's a deficiency where you may be doing something, but it's not documented as a proof, so there's no documentation. So a deficiency is basically saying you're not compliant, whereas with a recommendation, you could be compliant, but you could be doing something that's not efficient. So it's okay for an inspector to recommend a more efficient process to do things. That doesn't mean that you are not compliant. It makes it easier when they recommend that maybe this would be an easier way to do things. So when you're doing the training, it helps you to decide when you give a deficiency, when can you give a recommendation. It helps you with time management, as Stephanie says, because you go in, there's just so much to read. You could sit there going through procedures, and before you know it, the time is up and you didn't get a chance to walk around to ask questions. So with the training, it helps you to help you with time management and the whole process. So if you're interested in being an inspector, I would recommend that you speak to your manager or supervisor and look into doing the training. Maybe we could put some links to some of the training where you could go to get training later on in this process if you're interested in doing the training. But I would recommend that to, even if you're not ready to go out there, I would recommend it to anyone because that would be really helpful for you and it would be helpful for your lab. Okay, so maybe we could just talk about different opportunities for inspecting or benefits that we could have in inspecting the lab. Tywauna, you think you could talk about that, some of the benefits?
Sure, Lona. I definitely can talk about some of the benefits. First, being inspection ready is everybody's responsibility. So that's one of the things, whether you're on a team or not on a team, being inspection ready is the responsibility of every single member of the laboratory team. There are benefits of being on an inspection team, internal team, or being able to inspect a laboratory, and I'll talk about 4 key benefits today. Continuous education is benefit number 1. As we know, if we're not learning, then we're not growing. And so continuous education for us to be able to continuously improve. It also helps with engagement and ownership. So when you are aware of the criteria in which the lab needs to operate, from either going on an inspection or being inspected, it allows you to be more engaged, especially as decisions are made in your laboratory. It takes the why are we doing this, why we have to document this, why do I have to be in compliance for this, why do I have to do competency like this, why do I have to have direct observation, why do I have to review maintenance records every month. Those kind of things. Once you start, as I call them, understanding the rules, it makes it a lot easier to understand the changes that your laboratory leadership team will have to make. Networking opportunity to observe other lab practices and exchange of ideas. So if you have the opportunity to go and inspect another laboratory, you get to see a different way of doing things. Of course, we have to be in line with the overall accrediting body's rules, as I like to say, or standards. But there are other ways that people do things. Maybe they have some handy logs that they use to make documentation a little bit more easier or accessible for the team. So it's always good to be able to go out and network with other professionals in their laboratories. I've been on numerous inspections, and I've been on the side of being inspected several times. And I learn something new every time because everybody's viewpoint of the standards are a little bit different. And some people are just great at creating forms and logs and all of those things, or you may have a challenge in your laboratory that somebody else is just knocking it out of the park and has created a process to make it go more smoothly. So you get that opportunity to network and meet other lab professionals. The third benefit is broaden your experience as a laboratorian. As we know, sometimes if you're not on additional projects and maybe on the bench, this is an opportunity for you to learn more about the inspection process. It also gives you additional skills that you can add to your leadership toolbox in case if you're one day wanting to move into quality assurance and compliance. Maybe you want to move into laboratory leadership. Maybe you want to move into IT. You have to understand the criteria in which the laboratory has to operate. And so this gives you the opportunity to learn more about some of those things, broadening your experience and learning something different. And then another benefit is it deepens your understanding and knowledge of the standards. Again, I kind of touched on this earlier, but when you really understand what it is that CAP, CLIA, AABB, whoever it is, COLA, Joint Commission, whoever it is that is the regulatory agency for your laboratory. Once you understand what they are looking for, it really makes things so much simpler. And the reason I say that is because it reduces the overwhelm. They're telling you what you have to do. They're telling you what they're looking for. And so it makes that overwhelm a little bit less anxious. So if you take an interest in learning what those checklist items are, learning what those standards are, you will be able to adapt to some of the changes that happens in your environment. I've been fortunate to work with a few teams in different hospital, reference, pharmaceutical laboratories, and you just see people's eyes light up with excitement and with interest when they find out the reason of why we do what we do. It's not to pick on you or, because we don't like what you're doing. That's not the reason at all. It's because we have to be accountable to a higher agency, and that's why we're saying you need to make sure you document your maintenance logs every day. You need to make sure that your documentation tells the complete story. Your documentation should tell the story without you even saying a word. As I know, if your laboratory, and this is just a little secret, if your laboratory looks prepared, looks professional, looks like you have things in order, your documentation is in order, it will allow for a smooth inspection because things are in order, things are organized, things are documented. So these are just some of the benefits on why you should be involved with a team. If you're part of a larger system, this will include multiple facilities. You should ask your supervisor or your team leader if you have the chance to go and do a mock inspection at one of your other laboratories. Sometimes fresh eyes see something that those who are in the laboratory might not be able to see. So even if you're not able to go on an official inspection, that's a good way to get experience. And sometimes when your team goes and inspects, there's an opportunity for them to bring a trainee. So if you have an interest in that, express that to your supervisor, and you never know. They might bring you along on the next inspection. I've been off on several external, and we always bring somebody because we want somebody to be able to learn and grow and develop. So you just have to ask and express your interest and, ask your team leader or supervisor, can I see the checklist items? I just want to take a look. I want to be knowledgeable and informed. So those are some of the ways that you can, or even asking to go on an external inspection. Remember, when the inspection team comes to inspect you, they can ask anybody anything at any time. And most inspectors are not sitting in an office reading procedures all day. They're out in the laboratory talking to all of the team members, wanting to know what you do and how you do it. So those are just some benefits of why this is important. And that's all I have for it. Ladies?
Well, we certainly hope that this podcast has helped to ease any anxiety that you have had about any parts of the inspection process. Whether you are nervous about going on an inspection, we hope that this podcast has given you a roadmap to ease those concerns, or whether you are coming up on an inspection. We know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, many agencies had slowed down on doing inspections, but as of June, some agencies have started to pick up and slowly start back. And so whether you're nervous about that, we hope that this podcast has helped give you some type of direction and some type of tips to help ease your mind. But in summary, the moral of the story is to always look at your inspection as an opportunity to improve. Whether you are the inspector and you can improve on your understandings of the checklist, you can take it as an opportunity to grow in your field. Whether you are being inspected and helping respond to any findings that were found during the inspection, and you take it as an opportunity to better your team, better your processes, all of the inspection processes and methods are meant to improve your testing operations and ultimately make things better for the patients that we serve. There's several other resources out there that can help you with this, so be sure to check out websites like the CAP or the ASCP, and the ASCP is coming out with their own podcast soon, so be sure to check that out because I'm sure they'll have some great tips on there of their own. But if you have any additional questions, make sure you reach out to myself and my co-host, and we're happy to continue to help you with your journey in being successful in your laboratory inspections. With that, I'll say thank you for tuning in and checking out this episode about surviving your laboratory inspections of Elaborate Topics with our hosts, Tywauna Wilson, Lona Small, and myself, Stephanie Whitehead. If you like what you heard today and you want to listen to our previous episodes, please subscribe to directimpactbroadcasting.com or your favorite podcast platform. Remember to email us, reach out to us. We want to hear what you're thinking. Maybe you have other things you'd like for us to mention or talk about. You can email us all at elaboratetopics@directimpactbroadcasting.com. And also you can learn more about the guests of the show. So please tune in next week and hear another amazing episode of this podcast. And until then, have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Elaborate Topics, where your hosts discussed relevant strategies for laboratory professionals. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and listen to us on directimpactbroadcasting.com. Stay tuned for another episode with information you can use to excel in your laboratory career.